Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy Haig, the editor-in-chief of the monthly Denver Landlords Digest newsletter, proudly presented by Keyrenter Denver Property Management, and we're on a mission. We understand that being a landlord or property investor comes with its fair share of challenges, and that's why we're here to help. With 9 years of hands-on experience managing over 1,000 rental properties, we've been through the trenches and learned the ropes so you don't have to. The Denver Landlords Digest is your passport to the world of successful landlordship, curated by our team to provide essential insights to thousands of landlords and rental property investors worldwide. With our new monthly podcast, we want to take you behind the scenes of the Digest as we sit down with local industry experts, diving into burning topics related to rental properties and providing you valuable insights and actionable advice. Not a reader of the Digest yet? Click the link in the show notes so you never miss an upcoming issue, and visit our website at keyrenterdenver.com to check out our archive of past issues. Now, let's jump into today's conversation and discover new ways to thrive in the world of rental property management. Welcome to the Denver Landlords Digest podcast. Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to this month's episode of the Denver Landlords Digest podcast. This is your one-stop shop for everything that you need to be just a great landlord or real estate investor. And we're so excited to provide this space where we can answer some of your burning questions or some of your topics of interest that might allow you to feel more secure and confident in all of your real estate endeavors. And I'm your moderator, Jeremy Haig. I also am our editor-in-chief of the accompanying e-newsletter that comes out once a month called the Denver Landlords Digest. If you've not heard of it yet or signed up, make sure that you click the link in the show notes. We'll get you signed up. Make sure that you're receiving all of the accompanying interviews, blogs that go along with this podcast. This podcast is meant to serve as a behind-the-scenes conversation with experts, completing and adding on to our monthly digest and delving deeper into key topics for landlords and property investors. And as always, I get to introduce and welcome back to the show my co-moderator and co-host, Brandon Scholten, the CEO of Keyrenter Denver Property Management, and a seasoned expert in most everything that we're going to be talking about on this show. And Brandon, I'm so excited to have you back and wondered if you could share, before we really get into today's topic, a little bit about what winter preparedness means for a property investor.
Oh man, you've really set the bar high with that. I think it's just winter comes with, temperature swings. You get fundamentally water expands when it gets cold. I think that's at the root of a lot of winterization type things. So that's where my head goes. I think there's a lot to explore here, and it's just essentially like, hey, let's not spend more money than we need to because we weren't prepared or didn't kind of fix something in advance or get something ready, knowing that we are coming into this season. So
yeah,
that's where my head goes with it.
And we have a lot to dive into here, but I am so excited to welcome our two guests for this month's episode. We have Steve and Aaron from CS Home Solutions, which is a very well-respected property maintenance and remodeling company here in Denver. CS Home Solutions has a long-standing collaboration with Keyrenter. You've been one of the vendors that we've used for everything under the sun for quite a while now, and I'm just so excited to have you join us in this conversation. But to start off, I wondered if you would each be willing to introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about your experience in the industry. Steve, I'll start with you, if that's all right.
Sure, yeah. My name is Steve Fisser. So we've been at this for quite a while. CS Home Solutions was started in 2007. We do a lot of work with property management companies, investors, real estate agents, homeowners, and our focus, our main goal with what we do is a lot of household repairs, home renovations. So we do a lot of different things with houses, and winterization is a key component of this, especially going into the winter months. So we've seen a lot of things. We've been in thousands of houses. We've seen a lot of issues, a lot of ways that you could make your property better. And so there is a lot to this, and we've got a lot of experience with it.
Thank you. And Aaron, would you kind of share some of the same, a little bit about how you've gotten to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Aaron. I've been working with Steve now, CS Home Solutions, going on about 6 years, and kind of came from the sales, customer service aspect of life. Worked for AT&T for years, and so kind of was a good marriage of business practices here to be able to go out and talk with homeowners, clients, landlords. You kind of have a variety of people that you're gonna come across and try and figure out solutions to help these people maximize their investments, their properties, and it's been a really good experience so far. We've made a lot of good contacts and a lot of good friends.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you again both for taking the time to join us today. I'm going to kind of open the floor to the topic that I think is really important for us to discuss, especially this time of year. As we all know, working in this industry, winter carries its own unique set of challenges for property investors and rental property owners. And today I want to open a conversation about what it means to be winter prepared and what it means to winterize your property, which I think is just a really critical process to protect investments in real and rental properties, because especially here in Colorado, winters can be quite harsh at times. And so for me, when I was kind of thinking about what winterizing means, it's not just about avoiding short-term issues like frozen pipes, heating problems. That's a huge part of it, of course, that I'm sure we'll talk about. But also, I want us to also think about long-term care and maintaining the value of an investment over a longer period of time. And this is kind of essential for ensuring tenant safety, reducing costly emergency repairs, and just kind of overall preserving the longevity of some of our listeners' properties. So, for our listeners, many of whom are self-managing their rental properties, understanding and implementing some of these effective winterization strategies is kind of crucial to have as much of a hassle-free winter as possible. Ultimately, that's what we're getting at here, is how can we make our listeners' lives just a little bit easier, just a little bit less stressful, and kind of mitigate some of those avoidable issues that might pull you away from your families over the holiday or wake you up at 2 a.m. when the basement's flooding and that kind of thing. So, Brandon, I wonder if we could come back to you for a moment. Could you give us kind of a broad overview of what, we could get into some specifics here too, of what winterization entails from a property management viewpoint, and kind of why it's especially important in a place like Denver?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing I'd say is, avoid the big possible issues. So frozen pipes is going to be at the heart of that. Sprinkler systems, an easy one. So making sure you've properly prepared that for winter, blown out the lines. That can be both problematic with just it can damage the system and then you end up with repairs in the spring. But also it can be, if it's certain places close to the house and stuff, you can end up with a leak that will flood a basement or that kind of thing, waste a lot of water or whatever. So that's a big one. I also just think like the HVAC system, want to make sure your heater's working properly and not working harder than it needs to. So, clean filter, and it's a chance to seal up places where cold is getting into the house, insulate things better. That'll certainly prolong the life of your furnace if it's just not having to work as hard. So, a couple things I think of there.
No, absolutely. And I was also thinking about, I think some aspects of winterization, specifically, this is more of the short-term stuff, is also maintaining tenants' happiness, because it's kind of our requirement to provide a safe and habitable place for them, but also avoid some of the safety issues outside, like if your gutters are clogged and it's all of a sudden freezing up your driveway, you run the chance of a slip and fall injury, which I cover a little bit in the blog that's accompanying this digest. I sourced some numbers of just kind of like how much payouts often are for like a simple slip and fall injury is actually quite astounding. And it just is really easy to do just a few things ahead of time that can prevent some really big headaches. And so, Steve and Aaron, I wondered, with your experience in property maintenance and remodeling and that kind of thing, and just in the work that you all do on a regular basis, especially this time of year, could you describe a little bit about kind of the viewpoint that you all have on preparing properties for the winter, or any like common requests that you get from owners this time of year, or things that you might notice when you're at a property that you might suggest? Just kind of from your viewpoint in this industry, what's the sort of thing that you notice around this kind of area?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that goes into it. I think when you think of Denver, Colorado, you think it's going to snow, feet of snow all the time. So you're thinking, how am I going to handle the snow? A lot things that get lost with winter in Colorado, or things that we hear from tenants, that we work with tenants on, is the temperature fluctuations. I mean, you may have really cold days, really hot days. We're going with expansion on hot days versus contraction on cold. So there's things that go into houses that you don't necessarily think about other than just the snow. And like you said, the overall preparedness for the winter, like trying to get rid of the 1 o'clock in the morning phone call, like, hey, something's going on here, it is a big deal. So there's a lot that you can do to prepare your house for the winter. And we deal with a range of requests from tenants and homeowners. We get a lot of the, hey, I've got drafts coming through my front door, my windows are leaking air. We get that quite often. But there is a lot that goes into this that people don't necessarily see. And so I think winterization is a big thing, and I think there's plenty to talk about on this topic.
Yeah, and I would agree. Water intrusion is obviously number one for being in a cold climate, and trying to prevent that from all aspects. From outside, we have a lot of requests for gutter cleans, which we do in the fall time, and those are all scheduled where sometimes they don't need it. Sometimes you get there and the gutters have been packed for an entire year. But trying to keep gutters clear so the water can actually dissipate away from the foundation of the house, so it doesn't come back, run in, and end up soaking a basement. All of these things are intrusions for the tenant as well, where we're gonna a lot of times have to cut drywall, remove carpet. They have to move all of their property, all of their belongings out of the way, and these things don't happen overnight. So they're obviously kind of put out for sometimes a month, sometimes 2 months at a time. The other thing that we see a lot is just sealing doors, sealing windows. Like Steve said, weather stripping around doors fails. It's a common thing, and trying to keep thresholds sealed, keep around doors, that makes a big difference in a heating bill. Helps out the tenants in that aspect, and makes a big difference in their daily.
Yeah. I think you brought up a really interesting point that I think some people might not think about when they're focusing on, I have to check all of this stuff in the winter. I think sometimes people can forget about the fact that some of the damages that can come from not doing the simple winterization preparedness stuff can also result in like several months of lost rental income. If this is not just your own home, if it is your own home, you may be stuck living through quite a bit of extensive repairs, but
it also can just be annoying to the tenant, right? Even if they're not demanding their, some reimbursement or rent or that kind of thing. All of these things are just, in the same way that you don't want to call on Thanksgiving that you got to go deal with. The tenant doesn't want their Thanksgiving disrupted and stuff. So it's part of this is just maintaining a happy tenant who's going to stay a long time, renew the lease, take good care of the property. Like, you erode away at that if they're constantly having to deal with stuff, especially that could have been dealt with, if you'd had a little foresight or been more diligent up front.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on at Keyrenter and really aspire to is that peaceful dynamic between renter and tenant, or between renter and owner. And these sort of situations can erode at that relationship faster than almost anything else, at least in my experience.
Everything else could have gone right, but if you take too long to get something and they have to move out of a room for a month or two, or it's just annoying.
And I'm sure kind of going off script here just a little bit. I'm sure you all had an epic time with us last winter when that crazy flash happened. I was still property manager at that time, and I think we had like 7 or 8 active flooded properties going on. Do you all have any kind of stories, not meant to be as a fear thing or to scare people, but just kind of sharing a little bit about like what can happen if you're not thinking this through?
Yeah, for sure. The goal, at least from a investment, homeowner, tenant standpoint, is you want a seamless place to live, right? You want a place you can come home to, you can leave, everything's going great. And that like Aaron said, that can be really thrown off if a property floods, and there are steps that can be taken, like maintaining the heat, thinking about things to eliminate these situations. But we've seen plenty of properties where people are in a motel for, a month or 2 months because they've got massive renovation going on where maybe the heat could have been turned on or something could have been done to eliminate that situation. And we've got tenants that are upset, put out. It's bad for the property management company because it adds a stress level there. It's bad for the homeowner because there's a huge expense there. And it's things that can possibly be eliminated on the front side of this. And we've had plenty of those situations. And what you want is you want to avoid those at all costs. And you want to have someone that just gets through, and life is good, and you want to try not to have those stressors, and we've seen plenty of those situations.
Yeah, one example that kind of stands out in my mind is last December when we had that cold snap. We had one of our owners who had tenants go out of town. They were from Arizona. They had moved here from Arizona, going to college, and they had headed back. They left a window cracked about 2 inches, and the cold air came in, froze a pipe in that bathroom, and essentially flooded the entire upstairs and downstairs. The water ran for 2 weeks before anybody caught it because they were out of town. Ran 250,000 gallons worth of water through the property before the neighbor called and said, "Trevor, I think we have an issue because our water pressure is really low and we just don't know what's going on." And so, long story short, that ended up being a complete gut. Every piece of drywall had to come out of that house. The tenants had to find another place to live, and it was about a 6 to 8 month project between insurance and just kind of everything that they had to go through. So you want to try and avoid that, and there's little tips and tricks. Close your windows if you're going to leave. Open your doors. Leave your thermostat set at 60, even though you're not going to be there. Those are all things that we can pass along to these tenants and try and make it helpful for everyone.
I know we've seen that before too, especially people coming from warm climates who just got accustomed to when you go out of town, you turn that thing off, save yourself a little bit of money, and they don't think about the risks of those low temps.
And with the weather here, it might have been a beautiful day when you left. That doesn't mean that it'll stay that way while you're gone.
Absolutely.
I think fires increase too significantly in the winter. Like I think you're most likely to. So that's another risk if when things are running a lot, and space heaters are often brought out for that room that doesn't get. So I think they've come a long way. You probably don't see it as much anymore, but still kind of there's some fire hazards that go along with the cold too.
This is a great kind of transition here. I'm just thinking about really focusing on the individuals who might be managing their own rental, maybe through their first winter, this winter. What kind of information should they be making sure to provide to their tenants? You touched on some of these, but I just want to highlight these even more. Of if you want to have like effective communication of like, hey, here are the things that you need to do as a landlord I'm expecting of you, especially if, like you said, the tenants might be leaving town for the holidays. There's a lot going on in the next couple months where people visit family, go out of town, go to Disney World to stay warm, like whatever it is. What are some of these things that we need to make sure that our landlords and our listeners don't overlook in that communication?
There's a lot to think about with that, and I will say, to touch on a point that Brandon just brought up, I think fires are way more confident in the winter. I personally had a house fire 7 years ago, and it was in the winter, right before Christmas. It happens. We have company meetings, and we always stress fire and flood. Those are the two things that seem to cause the most damages to property. So we try to do everything we can to stay away from fire and flood. And when you see a fire, when you see a flood, those are the things that are going to put people out. Those are the things that are going to, cost the most stress, life, things like that. So basic things that maybe tenants wouldn't always think about that are very easy everyday things that you can overlook. I would say the portable heater thing. A lot of tenants will put on it, get a portable heater going and then maybe not turn it off when they, are out of the room or leave the house. Make sure that when you're not around that portable heater that you're unplugging it, not leaving something that could be a fire hazard. Updating, or not necessarily updating, but checking your smoke and CO detectors because of that fire damage that may be more possible in the winter time. You want to have those systems functioning so if something does happen that you've got that alert there. So check your smoke detectors, check your CO detectors. If something's going on with your furnace is being used more in the winter, if something's not working correctly and that thing's emitting more carbon monoxide, we want the CO2 detectors in there working. Same thing with the smoke detectors. We want those working if there's going to be a fire.
When you say check them, do you just mean like push the button and make sure it beeps?
I want to check them to make sure we want to make sure they're within the 10-year period. So we want to make sure they're not. We don't have a smoke detector. We've seen that in many houses. Smoke detector from 2000. Update them. Make sure they're going to be within the 10-year period. Make sure they're everywhere they need to be. Yes, test them to make sure they're actually working. But make sure you've got what is needed and they're up to date. Because if they're not working and you have something like that happen, it's not giving you the alert that's needed.
We're amazed how often when tenants move out, the smoke detectors are just gone. Mm-hmm. So all we can assume is the battery probably goes out. It starts chirping. Some night they wake up and start pulling it apart to get that to stop, and then they never put one back up or something. So yeah, maybe it's just a good chance for the landlord to walk the house, like the property, and make sure everything's still where it needs to be.
They can be an annoyance. I mean, I personally had a fire. I told my daughters all the time because we would have like our smoke detector went off. And they're like, "Oh, Dad," and I go, "We're never going to use these things, but we have to have them." I've seen many rental properties where because like you just said, Brandon, they've gone off. The tenants have taken them off the wall. They don't realize that things can happen. Make sure that those are working because they can happen. Fires, they're way more common than we realize. You hear about them all of the time, and I've heard about them more since I've actually had them or had one. So make sure your smoke detectors are working, and if they're beeping, get a new one, put it up there. Make sure the batteries are working because you want to have those. You don't want to just take it off, stash it for the winter, and then something happens to where you don't have it. So same thing with the carbon monoxide detectors. It's a silent killer. It doesn't happen that often, but it can. And that's why Denver enacted the laws, because people have died from carbon monoxide. So you want to make sure that those are up to date and working. Heating blankets. I mean, people love heating blankets. Make sure that you're unplugging those when you're not using those. My daughters love the heating blanket. They love to walk away from it, leave it on the couch. I show up and I go, what? I try to express to them, hey, turn that stuff off or unplug that stuff. Don't leave those things don't leave those things by themselves when you're not at home. So those are basic things. Crazy, seen it happen. Don't heat your house with your oven. I mean, I've seen people that have open their oven to heat their house, and it goes on, right? And we may not all see it, but that stuff happens. Be realistic with what you're doing and make sure that you're not.
I have seen that as hey, if you're not getting enough heat in your kitchen and it's going to be really cold, like turn the oven on low and crack it. Is that, you would say, bad idea every time?
I would say I personally don't cook a lot. My wife does. And so when she'll leave the oven on, I check it because I check it all the time. We open the door. We let the rest of the heat come out after we've cooked. But in a worst case scenario, like your furnace has gone out, you have no heat, use it, but monitor it. But just don't.
You shouldn't be using it on a regular basis.
Do not.
Not all night long.
Yes, do not heat your house with that. An open flame, as ridiculous as it sounds. We've seen some weird things. Just do not do that.
Yeah.
And I'll touch back on the smoke detectors for those owners out there that are self-managing. The rule in Denver, and I believe it should be anywhere, you got to have a smoke detector in every single bedroom, and you have to have a CO detector within 15 feet of every bedroom. A lot of people will put a smoke detector in the kitchen and say that should be fine. That's where we do most of the cooking. If anything happens, it's going to be in the kitchen, which is not true. So smoke detectors need to be in every single bedroom. All the levels need to have a CO detector within 15 feet of the bedrooms, living spaces.
And thank you for highlighting the carbon monoxide thing as well. I think that's one of those places that, because it's not the the flashbang damage, it can get overlooked at times, or people don't think about the fact that your furnace is running more aggressively than it is the rest of the year. And so if you're not monitoring that, some real damage can be done. Is there anything else that you would suggest that maybe are the overlooked things that people don't do? I think we've covered quite a few, but I just don't know if there's any others. One thing that I wanted to see if this is what I was always taught as a kid, and I want to make sure that this is true to pass along to all tenants as well. If you're going out of town, leave the faucets dripping just a little bit to keep movement through the pipes, and then open your cabinet doors so that the heat can access pipes in the wall.
And that would be true for like exterior, like anything running kind of along the exterior of the house typically is where you see that.
Perfect.
I think one thing I'd add maybe on that note too is just to have a conversation with your tenants, like, hey, if you notice all of a sudden like a faucet isn't working, that's a really big deal. Like if we can know about it right when you notice that happening, as opposed to like, because that means that there's freezing in that line, and you can have some freezing that doesn't necessarily like split a pipe open and it'll come back and start flowing okay. But like those are the signs that something's frozen, and like oftentimes things will freeze and it doesn't start leaking right away. The ice expands, the water expands when it turns to ice, it splits the pipe, and it'll be fine for a day or two while it's still cold. It's not until that thaws out. So just tenants having an awareness that like these things are a big deal, and they should make sure they raise it to whoever's managing the property. It's a big deal.
I would say one kind of big overlooked area we see in Denver with a lot of these older properties is crawl spaces. For these houses that have crawl spaces, a lot of the piping runs underneath the house. And we see a lot of it that's uninsulated, has no wrap around any of the pipes. A lot of times that's where the main water comes in, and there's the shutoffs down there. So trying to, as fun as it is to get down into a crawl space, have somebody go down there and just make sure you don't have anything glaring. We've been underneath houses and seen big, huge puddles of water where it had been leaking for months, and they just didn't know it because nobody goes under there. So having somebody inspect the crawl space, maybe wrap some insulation around any exposed pipes is a big missed thing.
Just to circle back on that last one, did we say for sure yes, you would recommend telling your tenants if you go out of town, turn all the faucets on to just a drip? Or what do you guys think?
Yeah, what's your take on that?
So my take is turn your main off. So if you're going out of town for an extended period of time, I always do it. I turn the main water line off of my house. So even if you have a vacant property, let's say you're a homeowner that someone's moved out and you're still waiting for someone to move in, you're listing your property, whatever it is, I always shut the water off at the main, because if you have freeze damage, it's going to be very minimal because it's only going to be the water that's in that line. The issue that we see is someone goes away for an extended period of time, like Aaron said, the main is on, you've got expansion in that line, it's cracked, ice is formed, it's cracked, and then it's just pumping out gallons and gallons and gallons. If your main line is off, you've got a water line that cracks, you're going to see a little bit of water come out in that area. The reason you would let it drip is, and I say this to people, like if it's extreme cold, we get a couple deep freezes every year in Denver. We don't get a lot, but there's a couple every year when it gets really cold, and you're in your place. You want to keep those lines moving because stagnant water will freeze quicker than moving water. So I would say open up your interior faucets a little bit to let them drip so the water's moving. It just won't freeze as quickly. I would do that on the inside of the house, monitor it obviously so you're not like overflowing a drain or something like that. But if you're going to leave for an extended period of time, I shut the main off. Even in the summertime I do that because I don't want my water heater to leak and come home. And I've seen this, I've had friends that have had this in the dead of summer come home, water heater leaks because you don't know when it's going to happen unless you replace that thing all of the time. You got water all over your basement. So I always, when I'm leaving for more than like 3 or 4 days, shut the water off at the main, unless you have a reason to leave it on, like someone's coming over, going to use the bathroom or something like that. I shut it off because that will stop, and you can only flood your house with the amount of water that's in the lines at that time.
That's smart. I think that's a really good takeaway. And if I'm going out of town, is there kind of a magic number as to where I should leave my thermostat set at? That's kind of low enough to not accrue.
I would say 58 to 60.
That's kind of what I thought. Mm-hmm. Perfect.
It probably depends a little bit, like if in some houses you have one thermostat and it's in a place that is heated fine, but like maybe you know that there's a wing of the house that doesn't get near as much heat, and you have a cold spell coming, then maybe it makes sense to turn it higher, that kind of thing. I don't know.
If I've just received a phone call from a tenant saying, hey, just what we were talking about just a moment ago of like, there's no water coming out of this faucet, what steps can be taken to try to avoid the flood itself? Like, what can be done in that moment to help? Like, if I'm
turn the main off.
Yeah, if I'm listening to this podcast right now and I'm like, my tenant just called.
Yeah.
What should I be doing?
So like Brandon said, you're not going to see it when it's frozen. And so I used to do a lot of foreclosure work back in the day when we had vacant properties all over the city of Denver, 2007, 2008. And so I would actually go into houses that had the heat shut down for quite a while, and there was minimal damage. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a frozen pipe, you're going to flood the house. But if you can shut that main water off, you're going to mitigate a huge issue with that. And so if you've got an area where a faucet, the water's not coming out and it's cold outside, it doesn't mean that a disaster is imminent. Yeah, shut the main off, try to see what's going on, and then if it's not working, have someone come out to help you. If you can't get someone out there to help you, try to get heat to that area to thaw that pipe out, whether it's opening up the doors of your bathroom vanity, your kitchen sink to get some heat in there, open up the faucet so you're trying to get the water to come out, getting some heat to it with a space heater, something like that to thaw that pipe out, and then watching it. You're going to get a 1-inch crack, a vertical crack in the pipe, and you might see it underneath the sink. It might be inside the wall, which is harder to diagnose. So the main issue is when it does thaw or when you turn the water back on, you've got to be very diligent to see, hey, do I got water coming out of a faucet, out of a line underneath the faucet, or do I hear water running in a wall? That's the issue is when it thaws or when the water's turned back on.
Yeah, you basically want to turn all the faucets back off, open up the main slowly, and there might be a little air in the line, so it'll like take a minute to fill all those lines up, but then it should stop. And if it doesn't, then you're like, okay, we got to find where it's leaking.
And the one way you can check that is when you do turn the water on, go through and shut all your faucets off, turn the water on, look at your water meter. If it's stagnant, you're okay. But if all the faucets and everything are shut off and you've got live water to the house and your water meter is turning, you've got an issue. And if it's inside the wall, you're going to have to cut into that wall and you have to go do some diagnosis to figure out where it's coming from.
Are most water meters accessible, or are some still in the pits?
Some are in the pits, which technically the city is the one that needs to access that. Some are inside your house. Usually they are going to be down from the front spigot on your house. So usually if you can tell where that water spigot is in the front of the house, you go downstairs in the basement, the crawl space, your meter is going to be down there, but they're not always there. Sometimes they are in that pit in the street, but that is how I always test when I turn the water back on. Like, if that thing not moving, then I'm okay. If it is, you've got an issue. You really don't want live water in the house until you figure out where that issue is, because the house isn't ruined yet. Even if you have a damaged water line, that house is not.
Those are relatively simple fixes. It's not the end of the world.
You can fix a water line, like you said, Brandon, very easily. You can't fix the flood that's about to come if you don't do it.
Right. We've focused a lot on kind of some of our short-term winterization stuff. And by short-term, I mean kind of more like preparation for a trip or a particular event, like a freeze warning or that kind of thing. I want to kind of take a step back too and also look at more long-term winterization. And I'm specifically kind of leaning us towards like hail damage, roofing, that kind of thing, like stuff that might affect the structural integrity of your house, which will ultimately affect its value and affect its longevity. So I wondered if we could talk a little bit too about how winterization can affect your property on a more long-term or more broad strokes kind of scope.
I think one thing that comes to mind that Aaron brought up earlier was just the gutter thing. That's not like this. Yeah, it's not a flood. It's not anything like that. But getting water consistently away from the foundation, is definitely, yeah, you've talked about like foundation and stuff. Those things it might take 10 years of it flowing the wrong way and you haven't cleared it, pouring off the edge of the gutter because it can't make it down, and then it's getting behind paint or those kind of things.
Yeah, stuff that you might not see that winter, but maybe affecting you down the road, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say one of the big issues with roofs are swamp coolers, because we do have a lot of swamp coolers in Denver, and having those properly winterized and drained, we see a lot of issues of those swamp coolers leaking down into the attic. People don't catch that leak until it's already all the way through and affecting drywall and the ceiling of the house. So having your swamp coolers checked every year, having those lines cleared out properly before it starts to get cold, because that's right out there in the elements, versus being a pipe that's inside has a little bit of a chance to stay warm. And with all of your roof stuff, insulation in your attic, if you don't have it in your rental, that's a huge investment that I think is worthwhile. Shoot some blow-in insulation and keep everything up there, fluffy.
Yeah, I think when you get those bad ice dams that hang off gutters, that's usually because of insufficient insulation in the attic, right?
Yep.
Because you're getting too much heat that melts snow from the bottom, right? And so it's actually too warm, and so you're getting that creates water. But then once it gets over to the gutter and it's back out in the cold, it builds up, and those can cause a lot of issues, right? Those ice dams.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's really good to know.
I would say some basic things that get overlooked for long term on the exterior of a property. Very simple things, sealing up your property. So we've seen houses, you go to a lot of houses, there's cracks in the caulking, the ceiling, around the windows, around the doors, decks, houses that need painting. Painting isn't always a fun thing to do, but it seals up your property. I've seen properties that haven't been painted for 30 years, and the only thing you can do to remedy that issue is to replace rotted wood. I've seen rotted wood that's only been, 5-10 years not painted, that's starting to rot. If you can get to that sooner than later, it's a much more cost-effective repair with just caulking it and maybe touching up the area. If you let that stuff go for periods of time, especially with the harsh winters of Denver, water intrusion in cracks is going to rot that stuff. Water intrusion on decks, you're going to go from a deck that just needs to be painted to a deck that needs to be replaced. A lot more expensive to replace a deck than it is to repaint a deck. Foundation cracks, anything, Brandon talked about it earlier, expansion, contraction, any place on your house that has a crack where water can get into it and turn into ice and expand is going to make that crack bigger. So checking for any areas of cracks on your house, whether it's a window, an area in the foundation, sealing all of that stuff up, and just giving that house an armor, a shield, and a resistance to the weather is going to save it from a lot of extra dollars spent down the road. Anywhere
you see that like ripply looking paint is where water's gotten behind it, right? And that should be scraped and repainted.
Primed, not just throwing. You can't just throw paint on unless it's got a primer in it. You can't just throw paint on bare wood. You got to scrape that. You've got to prime it, and you've got to paint it. And it's not fun, like I said, to spend money on a paint job, but it's a lot more fun to paint your house than it is to replace the wood,
or all your siding or
exactly.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
And there's so many houses that you drive by them and you say, man, that needs a lot of work to get it back to where it needs to be.
We have a lot of brick houses in Denver, and to touch on that caulking piece around the foundation, concrete and brick, you are going to get cracks where those two meet. It's going to happen. And so
is it just that they contract and expand at different rates or something?
Okay. Yeah, just like you were saying, it's like they always say in the concrete business, there's two guarantees with concrete. Your concrete's going to crack and nobody's going to steal your concrete. So taking a look around the foundation of any brick houses, a lot of times we'll put concrete walkways around them so we can get around, and that will crack. It needs to be sealed. It needs to be caulked and sealed with a good exterior.
How often would you suggest if I own a rental property or just a property in general, how often should I be having a roofing inspection done?
We don't do a lot of roofing.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't give you the best answer for that. I would, defer to a roofing company for that.
Totally.
But I would say once a year, because there are storms. There is a possibility with wind damage. We get a lot of heavy winds here, so you could have loose or missing shingles, which there's just another avenue, like we said with cracks. There's another avenue for water to get into your house or losing heat on your house. So I would say, once a year that might be a little overkill, but just so you're not going into the winter months with something that's not, adequate, or, if you've got a year that doesn't have a lot of extreme weather, maybe you're okay. But if you've got heavy storms or heavy winds, then, it's probably more necessary after those moments to get it checked out.
Yeah. Do you often go out for, like, maybe a leak that someone sees in the ceiling and find that it's because of something related to the roof that came through?
Could be a roof jack, a vent going up. A lot of times you'll have to reseal around those because they do fail. And those are real minor, and we don't get... before this year, we usually don't get a ton of rain in the spring, but we had an unusually wet spring. But just getting up there, a lot of times when we're doing the gutter cleans, we'll kind of look around and make sure all of those roof jacks and vents are sealed as well.
One thing to touch on with Aaron, gutter cleaning, a lot of people don't take it seriously. It's very important. And a lot of people don't understand. We get calls all the time, hey, my basement's leaking, what's going on? Water intrusion is a very difficult thing to see. Sometimes it's more simple than we make it out to be, and a lot of times you have gutters that aren't diverting water away from the property. So clean your gutters, clean your downspouts, especially in the winter, so when that melt is going, it's going away from the property. You don't want it coming straight down into your foundation. You want to get that water away from your property. So simple things like just cleaning the gutters, and depends on where you live, but there are plenty of neighborhoods that have lots of leaves. Just getting that stuff out of there so you can get the water to go away instead of coming back down into your foundation.
And add those 6-foot extensions at the bottom of the gutter so they go 6 foot away from the foundation versus just dumping directly onto the corner.
Tenants are notorious for bumping an extension on on the downspout, and it pops it out and then it's just maybe sitting there, so doing absolutely nothing to get the water away. So just a quick walk of the property you can identify some of those, and sometimes it's a simple screwdriver to reattach.
I got a really interesting question, kind of coming back to concrete and snow, from one of our owners asking, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. They were asking if we know of any decent ice melt product that doesn't destroy concrete walkways, and I was curious if you've ever come across anything like that.
Yeah, I'm not a huge user of ice melt. I know they do have some products that are a little bit, more safe for the environment, that type of stuff. But it seems that if you use that consistently, it just wants to eat away the top layer of that concrete. Haven't found anything that's really good besides just keeping a shovel on it and trying to move it away.
I'll keep doing some research too and see if I can find anything and follow up on it as well. But I just thought it'd be an interesting question.
I don't have any specifics on the type to use, but it is something to think about. And it not only for the safety of your property, but the safety of the people living in the property. Not everybody is conscious of what they're doing. You may have, someone in the property that, elderly population, you don't want people falling.
Right.
So it is something that you need to think about with specifically your rental properties, is keeping those areas clear, and educating your tenants on, hey, here's some ice melt, or get some ice melt, keep these things clear, because it is easy to get ice on sidewalks, and you don't want someone falling down. It also comes into play with the gutters. If we've seen plenty of leaking gutters that are leaking right down onto the front sidewalks, creating ice. So I do think ice melt is important. I don't know enough about different types, but it is something that you really want to be conscious of, is keeping that property safe for the people that are living in it.
I think from what I've seen, it's just ice melt is not like a replacement for shoveling. I've seen sometimes they'll just there's an inch layer of ice melt all over the walkways. That's not really necessary, but it's, shovel it, get what you can. Sometimes there's those hard areas where water runs backwards a little bit or something, and
The shady sides of houses.
or you have like a spot where maybe like when concrete, typically they do like a broom finish on it, and that melts pretty effectively, but sometimes you'll have spots of concrete where it's just like a really smooth finish, and so the water just sits there and heats up in the day. So yeah, there's just some spots where you need to use a little ice melt to keep that under control. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of like also keeping it, not just letting it sit there all winter with just tons of it on there, like sweep it up, once the storm clears, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Steve, I hope you could help start us off with this one. I want to talk about pests and pest control in the winter. Why is that an elevated thing this time of year? What does that mean? What should I be doing about it?
So it is a huge thing. Obviously, we are looking for warmth. Pests are looking for warmth. I go back to my college days. We didn't take care of our place. We had food sitting out. We had mice all over our house. We had mice coming up through our stove because we never removed food. We never did our dishes. So you want to keep pests out of your house. It seems like things, like a common sense thing that may get overlooked. You want to keep a clean house. You want to keep anything out of your house that a pest is going to want to come in for. Food related. As far as heat related, you want to keep areas that your pests can get into sealed up so they cannot get into your house. So small holes, mice can get into small holes, like walking the perimeter of your house, checking it out, making sure all those areas are sealed. We get so many calls every year that says, hey, I got mice here, what can we do? And it seems like it's a massive undertaking that you have to do all of this to get the mice out. You need to go around your house, see what are entry points for mice to get into, seal those up.
Is it usually pretty obvious? Like you see it pretty quickly, just
not
walk
always
in a house?
Obvious because
Okay.
they can be small little areas. So,
Sure.
but it's also just taking the time to go around, look. It's not always obvious, but it's also not always a rocket science type thing where you're going with intense tools to find this stuff. You're just walking it and trying to find small cracks, small entry points, small holes that a mouse could burrow into and get into. So sealing up those entry points, and then just common sense stuff, keeping your house clean. I tell my daughters all the time, hey, here's your soda can, here's your bowl with food in it, let's do the dishes, let's put them in the dishwasher, let's throw our trash away, let's not have it streaming out. I've seen plenty of homes with just food items laying around. I got my kids eating and leaving their chips bag in the couch. Don't do that kind of stuff. Throw it away. Take your trash out, maintain a clean property, which is important for your, better life, important for your landlord, your homeowner, but keep the property nice and clean, and you're going to deter having these pests inside of your house, which is a huge ordeal, and it's more common in the winter because rodents are trying to find a warm place to get to.
I would say some of the most common entry points we see on the inside of a house is underneath kitchen sinks. They will follow their plumbing lines right back in, and that house has probably been remodeled once or twice, and the hole that's going to be on that wall where the drain goes in isn't necessarily exactly sealed. So they'll follow in, they'll come into your cabinets there. They also come in a lot around baseboards, corners of baseboards, toe kicks in kitchens, anywhere where they can get in and you're not going to see them right away, and they can get out of sight when you're not in the kitchen. So all those areas can be just filled in with some pet deterrent expandable foam. We can patch them depending on how big the hole is. You can patch them with a little bit of drywall. But yeah, underneath sinks is a very common entry point we see.
It's one of those things too that, like, if you're proactive about, well, I guess if I say it this way, by the time you notice the pest problem, it's been going on for a while and it's harder to reverse. But if you start it ahead of time and just don't allow it to get to that point, I know it makes all the difference. I used to live in a brick apartment building downtown that was built in the 1930s, and I was pretty good about keeping my apartment clean, but I know the people around me were not. So we had this one mouse who would run across the living room floor every day at the exact same time. We named it, and we literally were like sit around waiting for him because he'd just come running around, moving from one apartment to the other one. And so sometimes, too, if I had taken the little extra effort also to seal those access points into mine, that probably would have prevented some of that, too. So it's both proactive and reactive.
Another good deterrent to use, especially in garages, because mice will go into garages, is peppermint oil.
Okay.
If you soak cotton balls with peppermint oil and put those in all the corners of where a mouse might kind of walk in, it's a humane way to just tell them, hey, this isn't a spot for you. The peppermint oil does wonders in sheds, garages, anything like that, and it smells good too.
That's really good to know. I'm going to absolutely keep that in mind.
And we like to use steel wool, so we're going to fill these gaps with, like Aaron said, the caulk sealant or the expansion foam, but we'll put steel wool inside of that or behind that because mice can't chew through that as easily because they can chew through things. So just closing up those gaps with things that they can't get through helps a lot. And it's just it's a keeping your eyes on the property type thing. And I think one thing, if you're a tenant, you just expect that my house is foolproof, nothing's going to happen. But you do just need to keep your eye on it. Keep a watchful eye. If you happen to see mice droppings in an area, it can be fixed, but it is better to jump on it now rather than making it a bigger problem. So just keeping a watchful eye. And if you see something, let someone know. Let your property manager know. Say, hey, I've got some mice, here. I don't know what's going on, but we need to, get on it now instead of waiting until it becomes a bigger issue.
And plus, once they're in the property itself, they can do all kinds of additional damage on top of that. So just don't allow yourself to be in that situation, I guess. Next, I want to talk about hoses. I think a lot of people know this one, but maybe don't know what exactly they should be doing. Maybe there's some confusion around, like, what should I be undoing? What should I be turning off? So can we just talk about why hose spigots is an important thing to be focusing on and what exactly I should be doing?
Yeah, so with hose spigots, a lot of people will leave them on with a spigot, or not a spigot, sorry, with a nozzle on the end of the hose. And so
like that has an off switch, so you just leave the hose open.
So if you're not like pushing the trigger on the nozzle, the hose is off. You think, hey, the hose is off. However, it's not. It's still bringing constant pressure to the actual spigot itself. So in the winter months, it's very important to go around and unscrew all of your hoses, disconnect them, because if you leave those connected with constant water pressure to them, they can crack. And if they happen to crack inside a wall, they can flood your basement. So I always recommend, you're not using the hoses in the winter months, unscrew the hoses, drain the hoses out just so they don't have water in them, drain the hoses out, roll them up, just, leave them like that for the winter. And you're saving your property from having constant pressure to that spigot when you're not using it. And then you can also add a cover to the spigot to insulate it a little more. But you want to make sure that you're not leaving those hose spigots with live water to them during the winter or freezing months.
I know I lived in a home built in like 1904 in Capitol Hill, and it had a whole system where there was a shutoff a ways back. Like we accessed it through the basement, and so you had to turn it off there, and then there was like a bleeder valve, and then you'd go open it was a whole pain, but probably something not, you shouldn't just rely on the tenant to do that unless they have, a pretty good understanding of mechanical systems and that kind of thing. So sometimes it's probably getting out and making sure it's done properly.
Send somebody to take a look and make sure.
I think that's pretty rare, though. I don't think there's a whole lot of those throughout Denver. I don't know how often you all see that.
It can happen. I mean, and that goes hand in hand with winterizing your sprinkler systems. Like, you will generally have someone go out to winterize the sprinkler system. Doesn't mean you necessarily need to unplug the hoses at that time, because a lot of times you're trying to do that prior to it freezing. You might be doing that in a warmer period, but you definitely want to winterize your sprinkler systems. You want to keep that, any active water that's not in a heated space in your property, you want to keep water from being active. So you want to winterize the sprinkler systems, and you want to remove those hoses. Ask your tenants to do it, or have someone go out and inspect it just to make sure they're not there. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's a safety preventer that can stop an issue that from happening.
As a property owner, one really easy thing you can do to help out all this winterization process is label your valves. So put a quick tag. This is the main, this is for sprinklers, this is for an outside spigot. That way, if it's going to be a different person usually every year that comes out to winterize, they can easily identify what water sources they need to turn off.
That's a great thought.
And you know what, that's a very important thought that Aaron had, and it seems so commonplace to us, and we have this conversation all the time with our team. This stuff is everyday knowledge to us that we're thinking, oh yeah, we just do this. You'd be surprised at how many times we go into a house and explain to tenants that have never lived in a place before on their own that, hey, this is why this outlet isn't working because it's on a switch, or this is why this doesn't work. So alert the tenants that, hey, here's your main water shutoff, in case something happens. This is where you can go to stop the water, to stop a leak in general. And then, like Aaron said, basic labeling of your property, making it more foolproof, making it more of an easier resource for your tenants to understand these things. Because quite frankly, when I moved into my first house, I didn't know a lot of the stuff that I know now. And if I would have just had some guidance or some labels, like he said, it's a huge thing that can help out in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like I remember just having the realization that most of our tenants in Denver that we were renting to, their path had been they lived with mom and dad, they went to college, they lived in a luxury apartment, and now they live in a property that we manage. And so they've never been responsible for any kind of maintenance or anything like that. And it's no fault of their own, but it just understanding that, and you've got to own that sometimes it takes slowing down a little bit to just explain. They may not know that there's a place to shut the water off, or they've never heard of that or whatever. So just making it, kind of maybe even taking the time to walk the property with them and show them some basic things. I know we do a little bit of that and create some notes in our system of like where the water main shutoff is, and we highlight some of those things with them.
We always will do that with jobs that we're doing. One of the things that we'll do, especially if we have, something that will relate to water, is we've told all of our team, like, hey, know where that main water shutoff is. And you'd be surprised at how many times the stuff that we're doing is just an educational stop. We'll have guys, I know Joel on our team will always call me, well, they just didn't know, what to do with this. So I really didn't do much, but I just explained to them how to use this. Communication is huge. And it's not that, the tenants don't know what they're doing. They just never, like you said, been exposed to it. Maybe it's the first time they've lived outside of, on their own. And so it seems like basic information, but it's important information. And it's stuff that just educating is a huge thing in stopping a lot of these problems.
Right, and because oftentimes you don't need to know it until it's already in an emergency, and at that point it's too late, or can be too late, or could be less of an issue or less of an emergency if you had known that information rather than having to go hunt it down in the moment. So there's never like a good time to go learn where your water main is, except for when there's a bad time to learn where your water main is, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think there's an important point here too, and just if you kind of act annoyed by your tenant or like their questions are stupid or that kind of thing, you're actually going to discourage them from asking these things, and so it's, if you can keep that communication open of just, hey, I'm here, call me if you have any questions about how this, and if you see something that seems weird or something's not working right, like, you're not annoying me. I want to, make sure you understand how to take care of the house properly.
Yeah. And then the last two that I have that you brought up that I want to touch on real quick before we close out today, you mentioned outdoor lighting, and I think that's a really interesting point to bring up and kind of why that's on your list. And then also furnace filters. I think those are the last two I'd love to just kind of get your take on.
Yeah, so I think outdoor lighting is something that is very important. We don't always think about it, but in many cases in the winter, the days are shorter, the nights are longer. We're leaving our house when it's dark. We're coming home to our house when it's dark. Whereas in the summertime, it's light most of the time, or a lot more often when we're home. So maintaining your outdoor lights or making sure that you have outdoor lighting is important. If someone's coming home at 6 o'clock in the winter and it's dark out, and they can't see where they're going, there's opportunities for issues to happen. And so making sure that all the lights work, making sure that the lights are adequate will just provide extra safety to a property. And it doesn't seem obvious in the summer when it's bright all the time. But in the winter when it's darker, have those lights work and make sure that you're changing out bulbs. It's a simple thing, but just make sure they're working, and it makes the residents, the overall area a safer place for everyone living there.
I've never thought of lighting as a seasonal issue, but that's a great point. With when it gets dark so early, we're a lot more reliant on porch lights and motion sensor lights and that
we've actually had those requests over the years where tenants have said, I get home at 6 now and I can't see where, so
maybe they're coming upstairs and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's a lot that
it does happen. So it's just something to think about. when it's darker more often.
And also, too, if you're going to be out of town, it's probably not in your best interest to leave all the lights off and make the home look uninhabited for periods of time. So
Absolutely.
throwing some of those on a timer, even just a few, to make the house look occupied.
Or I know a lot of porch lights you can turn it on and essentially it'll shut off during the day, and then when it senses it's dark, it turns on. So
Yeah.
I'm a huge proponent of motion sensor lights. I love them. I mean, I love them on any property that I have. I have them on my house. It's really nice because when you're in that space, the light comes on, or to deter people from, oh, well, there's actually a light here. They don't know if it's a motion light or, someone's doing something with it. So
when I'm walking around at night doing nothing suspicious, when those things pop on, I'm like, all of a sudden, like, oh, I need to seem like I'm not doing anything weird here.
I mean, technology we have nowadays, and it's relatively inexpensive to make these changes on your property as well.
Right.
And Aaron brought up a point, not to go off track here with technology. I mean, there is so much technology. I mean, you can control your thermostats when you're not at home. I mean, there's smart technology going everywhere. We're getting into an age where, like, you can utilize these resources. You can utilize technology. You can help yourself out. Ring cameras, things like that for security in your house. Like, they're not always as expensive as it seems, but if you have a smart thermostat, a ring camera, there are ways to add these things to your home to monitor the heat, monitor what's going on around the house.
One quick thought from that too, I remember that if you have an area where you've had some water intrusion issues, you can buy a little water alarm. I think they're $10 or $15 or something, run on a 9-volt battery that'll just sound if it detects that there's water on it. So putting those by your hot water heater, or that spot in your basement where you've had some issues in the past, can help you alert your tenant, who could alert you that something's going on and you need to get out there.
I like putting those water alerts. We haven't really talked about this. In sump pumps, there's a lot of houses with sump pumps in Colorado. So I like putting those water alerts in a sump pump because a pit shouldn't go past a certain level. So you put a water alarm in there. So if it happens to go past that level, the sump pump isn't working. And that just brings us to another point. Check your sump pump. A lot of them have floats. I mean, they all have floats. A lot of them have easy floats that you can just pick up and make sure that's working. We've seen plenty of houses that have sump pumps and the house is flooded because the sump pump wasn't working. It helps. It's not going to stop an issue if you've got 250,000 gallons of water going through your house, but it can help to get some of that water out of the house, and it's just something you have in the house. It might as well work. And so check your sump pumps, every 6 months. Just make sure that those are working, and it's an easy way to check. Just check the float that it's working, and if it's not, have it replaced, because it's one way to divert water out of your house that you might as well have working rather than not working.
Yeah. Every time my house flooded as a kid, it was always the sump pump, because we had two, because I grew up in Massachusetts on the ocean. So that thing would happen like every other year. We'd get a massive, and until you walk downstairs and like, oh, that's not supposed to be like that. And if you're not keeping an eye on it, I think one of the big takeaways here too is also not being afraid of small investments that may avoid big expenses. Like small investments in technology or in just additional precautions and protections can save you a massive amount of money down the road.
Even the small investment of time of walking your property
Totally.
Twice a year, or having we offer inspections to our clients, but it's just a big checklist like what we're talking about that they're going to go through inside and out to look for some of these areas that need to be addressed.
And one of my plans with this episode as well that our listeners can look forward to too is I'm going to distill kind of all of these topics that we've been discussing down and create a downloadable checklist that people can use, print it out, laminate it, check it off once every 6 months, kind of depending on when these different things need to be addressed. But we're going to turn this into something that you can really implement into your own property maintenance as well. And the last one that you mentioned that we can touch on real quick is also furnace filters and just the importance of checking those and swapping those out. Could you share a little bit about why that's so important?
Yeah, I mean, I would say furnace filters, we obviously don't use those in the summer. Our furnaces pretty much sit dormant, and furnace filters should be changed about every 3 months. A lot of people think that if they buy the most expensive furnace filter, they're doing their system justice, spending $20 on a furnace filter. A lot of times those can actually kind of hurt because it makes your HVAC system work harder than it needs to. So just a good, decent furnace filter and swapping them out consistently is more important to keep that running smoothly. The other part of your system that's really important to take care of is the ducts. We don't think about the dust that collects inside those ducts. There's a lot of companies out there that'll come and they'll sweep the ducts for a nominal fee just to make sure everything's clear, everything's clean, and you're not pushing all those mist allergens into the house. Especially for those houses that have cats, that have dogs, animals. It's another thing that probably should be done annually, and it's done fairly quickly and non-intrusive to the tenant.
Yeah. And I do want to add one thing with the furnace filters. I recommend replacing them every 3 months, even in the summer, because they do affect your air conditioner. So if that gets clogged, it can create backup in your house with water because your filter's been clogged. So replacing those every 3 months, they're not expensive. And I recommend for rental properties having 4 of those on hand at your property and letting your tenants know, hey, you need to put one of these in every 3 months. Here's a 4-pack. You're gonna use this for over the year. Next year, I'm gonna give you another 4-pack. They help to keep the airflow going in your HVAC system, and they're very important. And so, if those things get clogged, they drag on your system. And so, make sure that you are replacing those. Those gets forgotten so often. We see so many furnace filters that are just caked over because it's out of sight, out of mind. You don't ever see it, but it's very important. Doesn't seem like it. It is. I just dealt with a clogged AC that water all over the basement floor because the furnace filter was not changed. So if you can get your tenants to do that, to replace the furnace filter, it's a very important thing throughout the year.
We ship our tenants furnace filters so that it's, leaving a stack, again, can be out of sight. So that's one way we're trying to, hopefully if it comes to the door, they're a little more likely to be like, okay, I just need to cut open the box and get over there and swap it out right now.
Well, thank you all. This has been amazing. I want to pose kind of each of you one more quick kind of wrap-up question, and then I want to give Steve and Aaron, you guys, a chance also to share a little bit about what CS Home Solutions does, and if any of our listeners want to connect with you, how we do that. But before I get to that, I want to ask, will you, kind of looking at everything that we've discussed, if each of you could come up with one takeaway that you would like our listeners or landlords to take away from this episode and take away kind of from the concept of winter preparation, winterization, and just kind of property maintenance in general, honestly, is really what we've been talking about specific to this particular time of year, but really just bringing a new eye to how you look after your investment. What thoughts or takeaways would you like our listeners to be thinking about from our discussion today?
Well, I would say the 2 most important things for anything is going to be preventative maintenance to prevent these things from happening, and communication. If you see, a lot of times people just think this isn't a big deal, it's not my house, I'm not going to worry about it. But if you just communicate those issues, if you're a tenant, think of it as I'm helping out, kind of the greater good for the house, for the home that I live in, and also the owners and the property managers that are helping me get into these houses. So preventative maintenance, making sure we keep these things clear, and alerting of any noticed craziness.
Yeah.
I know there's a few things for me that I need to go home and look at my own house. So I'll just leave it at that. I have a takeaway for myself of going and walking the property.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
I think to follow up with what Aaron, because this is the CS Home Solutions, customer service home solutions. This is what we are very good at. We've got a lot of people on our team that communicate well, and it's unbelievable how many times we go to a property and just speaking with the tenants, they're so happy that someone's talking to them and communicating with them and alerting them to what we do. We can't expect our tenants to know how to run these properties, and we can't expect these properties just to run themselves. There are plenty of homes that are in great shape, that do well. There are other properties that need a lot more assistance, but just communication and letting the tenants know we're on your side. We're not here to, you've got to do that furnace filter, no, hey, this is going to make your life better. This is going to make it to where you don't have, it's not going to be a foolproof solution because we can do so many different things and something could still happen. But we're on your side. We're trying to make it to where your life is not going to be interrupted from a flood. You're not going to be displaced for 2 months in a motel, but you've got to, empower yourself a little bit and help with some of these things. So we're going to give you the guidelines. We're going to communicate to you what needs to be done. We're here to help. We're not here just to show up and you've got to do this, you got to do this, but just that overall communication. And it adds to a situation, and that's why we like working with Keyrenter so much, because we get a lot of good feedback from tenants, and we get a lot of great feedback from what we've done. That's why we stay in business, is because we communicate well with the tenants. There are plenty of tenants out there that are like, oh, my landlord, they didn't ever call, they never do this, they don't take care of this place. I feel like you guys, Keyrenter, takes care of the places. I feel like we do an exceptional job of communicating with tenants, just letting them know we're here to work together with you on this. So like, we're trying as much as we can to mitigate these issues, to keep these places nice, but you also need to work with us on this. So just education and communication, basic things like Aaron said, labeling things, making this as easy as it is, because we're not all experts. And I say we're like, there's even things that we learn every day, but tenants especially, you'd be amazed at how many times they're like, oh, I didn't even know that. Just we're on your side here, and here's what you need to help us with to keep this thing running smoothly.
Our job is to create a functional, safe place for these people to live, just like we would want for our own home.
I think I love that framework too, especially when we talk about inspections. I think tenants can feel like we're like looking for the gotcha, you didn't do this, but yeah, like framing it as like, hey, we're trying to help make sure the house is working well for you, and any possible, there's some things here that if we catch now, it's not going to be intrusive to you in the future. If we don't do it now, you're going to be put out or dealing with some headache or a bunch of vendors scheduling work and that kind of thing. So yeah, I love that framing, and I think that's a good thing to carry forward.
And we also get tenants that are sometimes afraid to alert because they don't want to be oh man, if I don't want to say anything because I just want to live here. Sometimes this stuff's necessary.
Yeah.
If you see some of these things, or if you have any questions, we want to know this stuff. You don't want hidden things. You don't want water leaks that are going on forever. You don't want these things that could create bigger things. So making it apparent that, we want to know about these things that could be major issues, and we want to catch them now rather than at 2:00 on Christmas Eve.
Right.
Amazing. And I'm going to make sure that all of your contact information for CS Home Solutions is included in all of the notes for this episode. So if you are interested in reaching out and working with CS Home Solutions on anything for your property or anything in the future, I want to make sure that you have everything that you need to do so. Is there anything else that you would like our listeners to know about how to contact you, or what kind of specialties or kind of areas of expertise you have, kind of what sort of business you'd be open to?
You can look us up. I mean, we cover the Denver metro area. You can look us up, cshomesolutions.com. Go to Google, CS Home Solutions. We've got over 300 awesome reviews. We've been at this for a long time. We've been at this since 2007. We do a great job, and I think we have an amazing team. And I like to tell our guys, I like to tell people that we're almost like your dad coming out to your house. Like, what we're here to do is we're here to fix your house, but we're actually here to make you comfortable in fixing your house. So we do a really good job with the communication. We send photos of all of our technicians, so you know who's coming to your house. Some random person isn't just showing up. We like to put you at ease as much as possible, and we've got an amazing crew who will, try to talk you through the issues, try to be as accommodating as possible, and communicate like we just talked about. We want to help as much as we can, and sometimes it's basic stuff, and we've come to the realization that just being accommodating, making people feel comfortable is a huge part of this, and so that's what we do really well. And if you're interested, cshomesolutions.com. You can also call us, get our information offline or online, but we'd love to be of service if you need us.
And I'll absolutely vouch for that. I started as a property manager here with Keyrenter before I moved over to more of the marketing side of things, and you all were always exceptional to work with. I was able to toss you guys some of my craziest, most obscure owner requests for like changes. I remember I think I sent you guys to help me try to figure out how to convert a basement kitchen that didn't have venting, and it just was just like crazy stuff. And you all were like able to give me really clear instructions, and yeah, you guys always do an exceptional job, and we love partnering with you. So we highly recommend to anybody needing.
Yeah, they've done work on my personal home as well as our office, a couple different projects and stuff. So clearly we believe in the work they do as well.
Well, once again, I want to thank all of you for your time today, taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down and kind of help us educate our owners on some of this winterization stuff. If, as always, you have any further interest in this topic, you can always reach out and contact us, or you can always go visit the Denver Landlords Digest for this month, which will have accompanying blogs and more information. And with that, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, guys.